Welcome to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. I am your host, Sharna Southern. I am an angel mum, a rainbow mum, a pregnancy loss practitioner, and trauma-informed coach. I created the Institute of Healing Through Pregnancy Loss out of my own experience with loss in the hopes to provide understanding and healing, educating people on pregnancy loss, and creating more women or men in trained support roles. In this podcast, I hope to shed light on what I wish I knew in relation to pregnancy loss, opening up the conversation, breaking the stigma, and bringing real-life stories plus guest experts. Thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, beautiful souls, to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. Today, I have with me Bobbi Martin. Bobbi is 33, originally from Texas, and living in North Carolina with her husband, who is in the military. Bobbi is a school counselor currently for an online school. They have a super cute fur baby, Tex, who definitely helps with her healing journey. Thank you for being with us, Bobbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful that you are here today with us to share your story. And from what I've seen, what your experience, the support and the awareness isn't necessarily there enough. Did you want to share a little bit about your story and what you want to bring awareness to?
Yes, absolutely. So, me and my husband, we found out we were pregnant in August of 23. So it was actually on the day after our 1 year anniversary of marriage. So, we're super excited. And at the time we were living in Florida and we were literally about a week away from moving to North Carolina. So I found out I was pregnant, and then so I started researching about OBs in the area I was moving to, and since the military community, we knew a few people out here. So I had some recommendations for this one OB office that was kind of like a midwife and OB, so kind of like rotating. So I made an appointment there. So when we got to North Carolina, I think they got me in about 8 weeks. I went in, heard the heartbeat, got the ultrasound. And during the ultrasound, they diagnosed me with a hematoma and a fibroid. So at the time, I really didn't know much about either. I was more worried about the fibroid than the hematoma. And so what they kind of told me was like, you have a small subchorionic hematoma. It's about like 2.3 centimeters, but we'll just kind of watch it and, check back with you every few weeks and kind of monitor the situation. Went home, told my parents, told my husband, how it went. I was like, I think it went good. I have these two things. I don't know a lot about them, but they were, not too worried about it, but they want to just like follow up every few weeks to monitor the situation. So about a week later, I had like a big bleed, and I call the OB office and tell them like, hey, this is what's going on. I hadn't bled up until that point, and they were like, well, that is normal with the hematoma, that you'll have some bleeding, but come in and we'll just check you out, make sure everything was okay. So that was about 9 weeks. So I went back in, everything was fine. We heard the heartbeat again, still looking good. The hematoma had grown a little bit, so again, they just kind of like wait and see kind of situation. We'll make another appointment for a few weeks and check you then. So I think I had bleeding pretty much off and on, or spotting. Went to my 12-week appointment, same thing. I did go home at one point in October to Texas to see my family. I remember going home, so I probably was at like about 14, 15 weeks. And I was staying with my sister, and she has two young kids. So I was like, I remember that we walked about a mile to pick up my niece from her school. And then we got back. I was bleeding a little, but nothing too concerning. I went on later that night and was like reading her a bedtime story and telling her goodnight. And I was sitting on her bed, and I just felt like another big gush of blood everywhere. My sister, she was freaking out. I was freaking out. My sister comes into the room and she's like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And I was like, Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm bleeding like this, like, the OBs, they all told me it's normal every time, I go. They're like, this will happen, you'll have some bleeding. And I know I remember thinking, like, well, this is kind of a lot of blood. And my sister saying this is not normal. And she's like, I've been pregnant twice. This has not happened to me. Like, you need to go to the ER. And I was like, well, I've gone to the doctor every time. They always say everything's okay. But, for all of our peace of mind, I'll go to the ER and just get checked out. So, of course, it's after hours. The ER is crazy. So, at the time, we went in, waited about 2 hours. I was actively bleeding, the whole time. And I remember, like, now looking back on it, it's one of the moments where I feel like, as a woman, I'm sitting here 14, 15 weeks pregnant. They check me into the ER. They don't send me to labor and delivery, which I know that's a hospital my sister delivered at. So I know they have like a OB, like, triage and stuff in there. Didn't send me to labor and delivery, didn't do anything, just like had me sit bleeding for like 2 hours until they called me back. And I remember thinking later on, like, they probably thought I was like miscarrying or something, and they just left me like there to just do it and didn't, no urgency whatsoever. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. So I get in, get checked out. And again, the ultrasound tech also I had a bad experience with that. Basically in the ER, the ultrasound tech isn't really supposed to tell you anything. They want the doctor to tell you. So their job is really just to look on the ultrasound, make their notes, give it to the doctor. And I'm like freaking out. I'm like, listen, I don't want any of this blood work. I just want to see if my baby's okay. That's all I care about. And I started like freaking out. And eventually she did show me the screen and the heartbeat. I was like, thank you so much. But she told me that. She was like, really, we're not supposed to do this, because if you were miscarrying or whatever, they want the doctor to let you know. And so that's just one of the things I've noted, about this whole experience. But anyway, so everything was good. I get back to my doctor here and kind of let them know what happened while I was away. And I was like, I remember thinking, well, I had walked a lot that day. I'd been on my feet a lot. And most of these big bleeds I've had, I've been on my feet. I've been active, and I think it's triggering it. And I remember they told me, well, if you walked a mile, maybe, walk like half a mile next time, like don't walk as far. And they were like, it shouldn't have any correlation to that walking. You shouldn't have any correlation to your bleeding. But I remember thinking like, that doesn't really sound right to me, but okay, I'll trust you. So they did have me the whole time on pelvic rest. And then they also had me like I couldn't work out or lift anything, heavier than 10 pounds or anything like that. But as far as like day-to-day life, they didn't have me on bed rest. They didn't have me, limit any sort of normal daily activities, including walking. They were like, walking is probably good for you, so you can, get out of the house, get a little movement. Anyway, so yeah, that's basically the only thing they told me was maybe walk a little less. So I was like, okay. Fast forward to like my 20-week anatomy scan. I went in and everything looked normal. Baby still had a good heart rate, was looking good. During that whole time, the hematoma had grown from about 2.3 to the biggest it was 10 centimeters. So when I went for my anatomy scan, it had shrunk a little bit, like back down to about 8 centimeters. So I remember I had seen a midwife this time because I saw different people kind of every time I went, not the same person, not the same doctor. So this was a midwife I saw this time. And I remember I was like actively bleeding that week. And I told her that. And I was like, I have been bleeding this week. It kind of stopped for a little bit. I was spotting, but it picked up a little bit this week. And she was like, well, the ultrasound showed that the hematoma was shrinking a little bit. So we feel good about it. At this time, they were probably monitoring me about every 3 to 4 weeks and had done an ultrasound each time to kind of monitor the hematoma. And I remember she told me, oh, you haven't even had like a Doppler scan yet. So next time you can come in 4 weeks and we'll just do the Doppler and just hear the heartbeat. And then in 8 weeks, we'll do another ultrasound to check the hematoma. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm at 20 weeks. I'm like halfway through the pregnancy at the most vital time. And you've been checking me every 3 to 4 weeks. And now you don't want to even do an ultrasound for 8 more weeks. So I remember just kind of like rubbing me the wrong way. But again, I'm like, okay, this is what the doctors are saying. So I'm just going to go with it. And everything has been good up until this point. And then flash forward to like 5 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and had just like really bad back pain and cramping a little bit. And I had some cramping like throughout this time. They told me that was the normal, with the bleeding and stuff. I would probably have a little bit of cramping, but it was a little worse than usual. But again, I didn't want to think too much about it. I was like, every other time I've been to the ER, been to the doctor, everything's always fine. So I didn't want to like psych myself out and worry too much. So I just kind of went back to sleep, woke up in the morning. I was still kind of cramping and not feeling good. And so I told my husband, I was like, something just feels off. Like, I'm just going to call and see like what they say. So I called and kind of let them know what was going on. And they were like, if it gets worse, come in and get checked out. So I remember we ran a few errands. We were like in the Chick-fil-A line. And I told my husband, I was like, okay, so like it's getting worse. Like something is not right. And I had texted my friends and texted one of my sister's friends who had round ligament pain. And I was like, I remember you saying you had round ligament pain. Like, what does it feel like? Like, maybe that's what I'm having. Like, I had no idea what was happening. So they were like, explain it to me. And I was like, okay, maybe it's just round ligament pain. And then my husband had me start like keeping track of like how far in between I was having these like cramps. So I started monitoring it, and then I just told him, I was like, we got to go. Like, we got to go. So again, my doctor was about an hour away. So I was like, I don't think we can make it that far. It's like, let's just go to the closest, ER OB that is around here. So it was about 15 minutes away. So we got into them and they were wonderful. They immediately like got me checked in, went to OB, all of that labor and delivery. And they had the doctor come in and she checked me out and she was like, okay, your membranes are at 100. You're 1 centimeter dilated, but your water hasn't broke yet. So she was like, you're in active labor. And at this time, like I knew like my contractions were so bad. I didn't even know what they were. And then, once all that, I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. She was like, your water hasn't broke yet. So we are going to get an IV and meds in you, and we're going to try to stop the laboring. And I was like, okay. And then after that, it would just like, it all happened so quick. And the nurses were fabulous. They truly were. But they came in and they were trying to give me an IV. And for some reason, I wasn't like, my veins weren't cooperating. So I think they stuck me like 5 times, like in both arms twice, like in my hand, and they just couldn't get it to stick. And then they were like, okay, we can't get, the IV in. We're going to call anesthesia up and they can assist with it. So I was like, okay. And at this point, it was like, I was like, so it's getting worse and worse. Like the contractions were awful. And then it just happened so quick. My water broke and then our baby came right after. Luckily, my husband was like down there and he was able to kind of like catch it coming out. The doctor, immediately gave it to my husband. The doctor was wonderful. And she just kind of explained to us more in that little bit of time than any other doctor had explained. But she told me that the lungs weren't fully developed. He was 21 weeks about. She's like, his lungs aren't fully developed. So he's not going to make it. But I want you, hold him and, say your goodbyes, use this. So it's almost like an out of body experience. I feel like I was just like watching it all happen. But I'm pretty sure my husband like handed the baby to me, got to hold it and say our goodbyes, all of that stuff. But I remember being like so angry at the time too, because I had this baby in my hand and the doctor already told me like, he's not going to make it. His lungs aren't fully developed, but he was breathing for a few minutes. So she was like, basically, we have to wait till his heart rate declines. So they kept, coming in and like checking on him. And it was almost like why do you keep coming in here and checking on him? You already told me like he's not going to make it. Like there's no chance, you know? So it was like a whole mix of emotions, like the whole entire thing. Later, when I kind of, you know, calmed down, she was able to come and talk to me. She explained it to me that basically my hematoma was so massive that every time I bled, it was like kind of irritating the membranes and chipping away at it. So eventually it just got to be too much like on my uterus, and that is what caused like my water to break early and me go into labor, which I had no idea any of that was happening, you know, during this whole process. I knew that something felt off the whole time. You know, I knew that I was bleeding so much, and nobody I knew at the time who had babies or was pregnant was experiencing that. So it was, you know, trying to navigate that and understand what was going on, but not, you know, not having that support and not really truly understanding, you know, until it happened.
It's a lot of what you just said just gave me goosebumps. Like, and I feel like a lot of your story, a lot of your experience was so much guesswork on your part. Like so much like, okay, or like we're taught that, you know, the doctors have the answers. So you listen to them, but you knew, like you could feel that something wasn't right. But on the other hand, you're taught, okay, the doctors are the ones with, you know, the degrees and all of the things. They know what they're talking about. But it's almost like you had this inner conflict of like, this is not what it feel, not this doesn't feel right for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're left feeling like unsupported and guessing a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I remember I would like talk to my husband or talk to my friends and family and be like, and we had, you know, we had just moved to North Carolina. So I just started working from home. I had been in the school system before that, but got this online job. I didn't have a huge community here. I didn't have, you know, my friends. I felt so isolated because I was like, okay, now, you know, the doctor told me go on pelvic rest, you know, you can't work out, you can't do any of that. So my whole routine was like thrown off from what I'm used to. And I remember, you know, some of my family like were like, well, just, you know, get out and take a little walk. But in my mind, I knew like, okay, no, because I know that walking like causes me to bleed. But they're all saying it's good for me. So should I go and do that? Maybe it is good for me. Then I was having like such conflict internally of like, I don't know what's right and what's wrong. I don't know if I'm helping the situation or if I'm hurting it by doing this. So it was such a struggle of like enjoying any of the pregnancy because all of this was going on. I was like, I don't even know. I don't know what I should be doing. The doctors are telling me one thing, but I feel another thing, you know, so it was really hard to kind of navigate that whole process and feelings, you know, during it.
You may or may not know, did they tell you, is there a way to know what causes the subchorionic hematoma? Like,
So, from all of the research I have done, there's nothing that really causes it. It is fairly common in IVF pregnancies, I guess, because they're implanted. We didn't do IVF; we're natural, but I have seen a lot of stuff where they are common in IVF. My cousin and one of my girlfriends both had one, so I asked them about it. My cousin, I think she bled maybe twice. My other friend who had one had a really small one. She didn't bleed at all and it resolved itself on its own. So a lot of the times the doctors told me, you know, it is a wait and see situation, but the majority of them resolve on their own. And they even told me sometimes you can go your whole pregnancy and have one and still it's fine. So I think that there's just not a lot of research and not a lot known about them. And I joined a Facebook group after the fact just to get support. And it was all about the subchorionic hematomas. There's like 10,000 people in it. And so, and all of their doctors kind of told them different things. I think, like looking back, if I would have been in that group and known about it, I probably would have done some things different from what my doctors had told me, just based on what I know and how I felt and what other people's doctors, told them. But I think it's tricky because, again, everyone's doctors kind of tell them something different, because I think that they're not all the same situations. And I do think majority of them do, continue and you're just fine in your pregnancy. But there is a big number of people where it had the same thing like mine, like their water broke early or caused them to go into preterm labor or something that I was just unaware of. I think the practice I went to, I had said there's different OBs and midwives. So we kind of rotate. You don't have just one, which I felt like that was kind of a disservice. I wish I did have just one that kind of followed my process. But I do remember one of the doctors did kind of mention about your water breaking early, but just the way that she kind of explained it and how I took it was that either in, the first trimester could cause like miscarriage, something go wrong, or like you'll make it throughout most of your pregnancy and maybe you'll have to, maybe it will come just a little early, like a few weeks is what I was thinking. I never assumed that it would be any time at all, or else I feel like I would have been more aware of what was going on. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I got out of the first trimester. They said that probably after that, the chances are lower the farther I get along that any real risk would happen. And then especially you think like the 20-week anatomy scan, that's a big one. You're like, okay, well now I'm safe. Now, surely nothing can go wrong. So that is kind of where my mind was. But yeah, to answer your question, there's not really any known causes of what really causes it.
And it just seemed like yours continued to grow and really affect the pregnancy. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned there were obviously other women who have experienced that as well, but obviously there's not a lot.
Yeah, just a lot of unknowns about it, which already in pregnancy, there's so many unknowns. So to have nobody really telling me what's going on and, oh, it's just a wait and see, but the majority of people are just fine, they'll resolve on itself. And even if they don't, you'll go on to have a healthy pregnancy, most likely. Like, well, I want to know, no, what, what are the risks? What could potentially happen? So I could feel more prepared for what was to come.
Yeah, and I do believe it seems to be a common thread between a lot of stories is a lot of experiences that we're not really told the full extent of what could happen, or it's just not
Mm-hmm.
explained in a way that's clear. You kind of still
Mm-hmm.
left, you walk away and you still kind of left, you're like, okay, I've got like a piece of this puzzle, but there's like so much of it that I still don't know, or that my questions weren't answered. And then you walk away with more questions and more uncertainty. And by the sounds of the doctors and the OBs and all of the things, all of the people that you came into contact with, no one until the end, when you were obviously going through, birthing your baby, no one actually explained to you clearly
Mm-hmm.
enough like what was happening and why it was happening and all of the things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was a hard part of it, because I'm like, okay, yeah, am I having round ligament pain? Am I having Braxton Hicks? Like, what is normal in pregnancy and what's not. And just, it's so hard to find, answers sometimes for those things. And I don't think that it's talked about enough that, there's so many unknowns. And if the doctors that you're going to, have this outlook and are so nonchalant about it, then you want to be, okay, everything's going to be good and believe that, when in reality, there's all these risks and things that could go wrong that you wish that you would have a little bit of insight to.
You said there was, after going through the pregnancy and preterm loss, you went into this Facebook group and, you said if there was things that you knew when you were going through the pregnancy, that you found out after, that you would sort of be more aware or being able to advocate for yourself a little bit more through the process. What is maybe like one or two things that would have or did change and would have changed that for you? 1 in 4 pregnancies will result in miscarriage. 1 in 8 women will experience infertility. 1 in 100 women will experience recurrent miscarriage. And 1 in 160 births end in stillbirth. Have you been wanting to make a difference in the lives of women or men who have experienced pregnancy loss because you can see so many suffering in silence, but you just don't know how? Collectively, we can change how bereaved parents can access mental, physical, and emotional support after their experience. There is a lot of women with unhealed trauma, and there is a huge gap in the current support system when it comes to bereaved parents' recovery after loss. There are too many women and men suffering in silence. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is a worldwide, one-of-a-kind program that gives you proven methods designed for healthcare professionals, medical staff, midwives, nurses, doulas, birth workers, coaches, and angel parents alike. The Pregnancy Loss Practitioner Certification is bridging that gap. It will give you a proven support structure to follow and education specific to pregnancy loss, created by a lost mum. It is creating more education specifically for loss so that you can enhance your service and become the point of difference. Or you can create the support that you so desperately needed in your healing after loss. This is the next level of growth and expansion you have been searching for. So does this sound like something that you have been searching for? Let's explore this more together. You can head to the episode show notes where you'll find the program application, or direct message me on Instagram and let's open up the conversation in how you can use this education. You have a gift, and I look forward to supporting you and witnessing you bring your gift to the world, healing and transforming women's lives.
I think that I would have, I know bed rest is so conflicting, I feel like, and some of the women on the Facebook group, their doctor did recommend bed rest and some didn't. But in my case, I truly feel like it would have benefited me, just because I did see that correlation. I think, what I've kind of gathered is maybe if you don't bleed as much, it could be a better outcome for you. So I think in my situation where I was bleeding so heavily for so long, I think resting more and doing a little bit of bed rest or just at least taking it more easy, because they kind of told me still go about your day-to-day life, like that you shouldn't change that. We don't recommend bed rest, still do all of your daily activities, just basically, pelvic rest, and don't lift heavy. So, that's with, a lot of things. So I think definitely I would have chose to rest my body a little more. And then two, again, it's kind of contradicting the things out there, but there are a few supplements that have seemed to kind of work for some women, one being ALA and then vitamin C. So I wish like I had gotten started on those supplements. Not all the time, but at least from that Facebook group and a lot of like the research there is that does help that, it doesn't really hurt your pregnancy in any way, and it can cause the hematoma to shrink. So I wish if I would have known about maybe some supplements and resting my body more and really listening to my body more and what I knew against, even if the doctors didn't recommend it, just kind of listening to myself more too is what I probably would have done different.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard in the time that you're going through it because it's so new and you're not aware. And unfortunately, we get to the other side of our experience and we're like, okay, now we're aware. Now, moving forward, I'll do something different. But it's hard. Although, in saying that as well, like you wish that there's things that, maybe your doctor would say that would help you along with these things, especially if you've got this consistent growth, being able to ask the questions. What could help minimize that? What could shrink this hematoma? What could I do outside of what I'm already doing that could benefit? And also just know that we can ask we can ask questions, we can challenge what they're saying, because if it doesn't feel right to you, if there's something sort of like you said, just being able to listen to your body, like, no, that doesn't feel right. Being able to just go, I need more answers and ask those questions. But it just sucks that you get to the other side of it and that you've been through that experience for you to have some awareness to then ask questions. But then that's where we
Exactly.
can have these conversations where then, knowing what you know, you can then in turn support someone else to ask the questions if that's what
Mm-hmm.
their experience is as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know they have like, there's just not a whole lot of research done, I feel like, in those topics, like what does help shrink it, what will help minimize it, and I do feel like maybe I wish that doctors had more research on it. And I know that there's like a few trials. That's where like I heard about that ALA supplement. There's a few trials out there. But again, it's really limited and there's some conflicting research on it, which is frustrating as well. But I do think, as long as it didn't hurt the pregnancy, which from what I've gathered, that supplement will not hurt anything. So, it's worth a try to at least try it and see, hey, if it's not going to hurt anything and it has helped some women shrink it, like, let's just try it
Mm.
at that point.
Yeah. And like you said, you weren't given sort of the same professional at each turn. So if you're not also happy with the responses that you're getting, or if you want to question, taking supplements, some doctors aren't going to support that decision. So finding the ones that can support that journey for you, because in the end it's your pregnancy, and you need to feel like you have some sense of control, even in a way, over
Mm-hmm.
your body and what's happening, but also trying to take in all of this information that you're taking in for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
You mentioned as well, obviously, that you went on to have a second pregnancy. Do you want to share about that, how that pregnancy went?
Sure. So after Carter, we did, they gave us in the hospital a birth certificate and everything. We named him, did all that. So we named him Carter. So after Carter, I took some time and kind of were on our healing journey. And then I knew we still wanted to try again eventually, but I wanted to let my body, heal itself and also my mind because, I wasn't in a good place after that, like navigating all the grief. So it was over summer, I found out we were pregnant again. We were actually in Colorado, and that's where we got married and engaged. So I was like, and we weren't trying yet. So it was unexpected. So it's like, oh, maybe this is like all of the pieces falling in line together. So we got into the doctor at 8 weeks, heard the heartbeat and all of that. All was good. And then we were supposed to be going out of town in a few weeks. So my doctor wanted to get me in right before that just to make sure everything was still good because she wanted to check too that I wasn't going to have another hematoma. So sometimes you can have them in, each pregnancy, but again, it just kind of depends. You don't really know. Luckily, I did not have one, but she checked me. I went in again. I was about 11 weeks, did the ultrasound, and then there was unfortunately no heartbeat at that ultrasound. So luckily, I had gone in before I left for my vacation. So the doctor we did a D&C, got in for that. And I think the reason why I kind of mentioned that pregnancy too is one thing with Carter was it was so hard to kind of pinpoint what to call the loss, right? Like this one was a miscarriage. It happened. I didn't go into labor. I lost the baby. There was no heartbeat. Did the D&C, all of that. With Carter, when we got to the hospital, there was still active heartbeat. He came out like living. We have a birth certificate, a death certificate, all of that. And then so I was like, well, it's not, a miscarriage. It's not really a stillbirth. Like what do I call that loss? How do I navigate it when I don't even know what to really call it or who to talk to about it, or who has gone through that similar type of loss that I can, connect to. And I think after, the second loss of the miscarriage and the D&C and just the two experiences of loss being so different, but also a lot of the same, a lot of similarities with, a positive pregnancy test. And you're looking forward to, the second you get that, your whole life kind of like changes in your perspective. You envision this baby coming into the world and all of this. So yeah, so that was hard to navigate. I feel like so soon after Carter too, where I was just like, what, how can this happen again? How is this, how am I losing another baby, in a very different way, but just as heartbreaking and just as, tough as that. So it's just interesting, the different experiences, but also, the same with it being, a loss, a pregnancy loss.
Yeah, and I think too, like I had a missed miscarriage, but it was no doctor actually told me what I had experienced. I felt like it was up to me to figure that out. And so, part of then your healing and navigating life after loss is then trying to also figure out where you fit now.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more, to that experience, to the healing, and trying to also figure out, like, well, you feel like you shouldn't be figuring it out on your own. You feel like you should be, told about what's actually, happened.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you're guessing all of that and you're guessing, so much of that pregnancy, and then you're guessing all of the things that happened afterwards, like it just adds to the healing. But like you said, there's so much, there is a lot of similarities in the way that you navigate that, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of your emotion, in terms of the grief, in terms of the heartbreak, because it is still a pregnancy that you wanted. It is still the future that you envisioned. It is still the baby that you've fallen in love with,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get to hold on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And the fact that you had to go through those two painful experiences, so different, but yet with the similarities. You mentioned that you were able to do some healing on the other side of your first pregnancy with Carter, and then obviously going and navigating the miscarriage. What were you able to do after Carter, and then potentially what you were able to do for yourself in that you carried over to your miscarriage and healing
Okay.
after that?
Yeah, so I feel like I was not good at healing at first. I immediately kind of like after Carter, it was around Christmas. I lost him December 9th. And so I'm an educator, so we get, usually 2 weeks off for Christmas. My husband's military, the same. So we had plans to go to Texas and go with his family and do all these things. So we had about a week to kind of grieve with ourselves. And then I threw myself in. I was like, no, we're still going. I still want to go see my family. Let's still go on the vacation we're planning. Like, let's do all of this. And same thing with after my miscarriage. After I had a DNC on Friday, the day after I was on a plane going on family vacation to Yellowstone. Now I look back and I was like, I would not do that again. So it did take me a while to kind of navigate it. But once I kind of finally came to terms and let myself feel those emotions, I feel like I just wanted to mask it and have it go away. And it wasn't until I really, one, started hearing other people's stories. So that's where I kind of found your podcast and other women who have gone through this, is what truly kind of helped me to, okay, there is a community, there is support out there, there are people. And then just sharing my story has also helped. So I did announce my first pregnancy on social media at like 15 weeks. So then after we lost him, I was like, okay, how am I going to navigate this? Because, obviously all my friends and family, social media knows. So I do want to say something. And so when I did kind of share my story about what happened, that was also really healing for me. It helped so many people, that I wouldn't have expected, kind of came out and showed up and showed support. And even hearing some of the stories of people that I was friends with on social media saying, like, this a similar thing happened to me, or I understand, where you're coming from, and I have a similar experience. So I feel like that really helped me too. I would say those are the big things. I did so much research. I feel like I was looking on Reddit, I was looking on Facebook groups, I was looking at podcasts, just hearing other stories and connecting. I don't know why it's so healing, but it is, just to know like you're not alone and there are other women going through this. So I feel like that has been a big a big part of my journey.
This is the whole reason why, for me starting the podcast, because it was what I was looking for as well, but I didn't find, and it was probably about a year after my experience that I found people who were going through similar things. So I wasn't able to access in the initial, weeks, months, in that period where I was like, I needed that validation. I needed that, someone to just say, like, I get it. I see you,
Mhm.
what you're going through, you're not making it up.
Mhm.
Because that's how I felt. I felt like I was making all of my emotions up, all of my thought processes. I'm like, I was going over and over and over in things, in my head. And, to have someone on the other side of you to say, it's okay. Like, you're not crazy.
Mhm.
Everything
Mhm.
that you have gone through is completely valid. And like you said, just to hear other stories, it validates you.
Mhm.
It validates your emotions, and it also can give you ways that other people have navigated it. So it also
Mhm.
shows, that you don't have to stay in the pain, you don't have to stay in the darkness, that there are ways through it. And,
Mhm.
there can be a beautiful life for you and possibilities for you on the other side, even in that moment where it may feel like it's unattainable for you, or you're stuck in the pain and you don't know the way forward. Just sort of being able to open yourself up to hearing what other people have to say can absolutely pull you through.
Yeah, I had the similar thought. I was like, am I great? Like, is it like I could not let myself just be sad at first? 'Cause I'm like, and that has been a huge part of my learning process too, is like not to compare grief, right? I want to be like, well, there's people who lose their babies or their children like much later in life. Like that is so terrible. Or, I just always tried to minimize my grief. And then when I finally realized, okay, no, this is hard. And every single woman who has gone through this knows that pain and that heartache, and it's all valid. It doesn't matter if it is a miscarriage, an ectopic, a chemical, whatever the case may be. It's still a loss, and it's still difficult and hard, and you're allowed to have those emotions and feel sad and navigate that. And I think I had to really learn that to in order to process my grief. It's like it's okay, I'm allowed to be sad at this experience. I'm allowed to have these feelings after a traumatic birth, of your first pregnancy, first baby, first experience that you have of this. And then I'm also allowed to be sad and have these feelings over this miscarriage. Like it doesn't matter where in the process, you're allowed to have those
Mm.
feelings of grief and heartache and do what you need to do to process it.
Yeah, that is so important. And it's things that women have expressed to me in the past as well. That they have felt they've not been allowed to grieve because, the baby wasn't that far along, or and like you said, it doesn't matter at any point. You are allowed to grieve. You are,
Mhm.
and it is grief. It's not
Mhm.
that you're making it up, and you're allowed to process it. And you might get people on the outside of you saying, otherwise, but just
Mhm.
know, and like you said, you have to do what's right for you. So that's such a powerful awareness and realization to have.
Mhm. It took a while, but I got there.
Yeah, and it takes as long as it takes. Like, and again, there's no finish line. Like, we're not rushing to a finish line. It's not a competition to see who can
Mm.
figure it out the fastest. So,
Mhm.
if it takes you a month to figure it out, if it takes you a year, or, it is what it is. And I think that's also, we can be very good at putting pressures and timeframes on ourselves to get through something. Even the grieving process, it's not going to look the same for everyone. So just
Mhm.
however it is for you. And like I said, it could be a month that you're in this grieving process, and then all of a sudden you're not. And that's okay. And allow that to be okay. Or it could be a
Mhm.
year, it could be 5 years. Like, But just know in that space that this doesn't have to last forever. If you allow
Mhm.
it, if you allow yourself to actively move through it, to process, to feel, to witness, it doesn't, and it won't. It inevitably won't last forever.
Mhm.
The heavier times will start to sort of dissipate. They'll start to not disappear because you've always got that grief, but they just won't be so intense and so consuming
Mhm.
and overwhelming.
Definitely.
So yeah, such a powerful awareness for you to have. And regardless of when you stumbled across it, it's definitely it's when you needed to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I have to feel this. Like enough of like pretending that it doesn't exist or it's not valid for me. I just have to let myself feel it in order, to move past it. And I feel like the most I have like worked through it and processed my grief, I would say it was about the year anniversary. So this past December, when it came up on a year, is really when I was like, okay, maybe I have been kind of letting it all just masking it and keeping myself busy and being like, oh yeah, this is me healthy. I'm doing all the things that I'm really just distracting myself from actually like feeling the hard feeling.
Mm.
And I think it's important that you do feel those hard feelings at some point, or however you need to process your grief to do that in whatever timeline. Because yeah, it does look different for everyone, but it was a good realization that I eventually had. Like I have to I have to figure this out and process my grief and figure out a way to acknowledge it and make those steps to move forward with it.
There's only so long you can mask it before it becomes really heavy and exhausting and hard to continue to mask, the things. And it starts to eat away at you, and you can feel it. Like it starts to chip away at your happiness, your joy, your personality. Like it starts to really chip away at the things that kind of could bring light to your life.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
I had people tell me that I thought I was masking it awesome. And I had loved ones around me that were like, no, we can see right through that. Because of the way I started showing up, like I was starting to show up in a completely different way. I didn't realize it does chip away at you, and it chips away your personality, your energy, the way that you show up, and it just becomes exhausting and really heavy. So it can work for a period of time, but it's not sustainable. It's not something that you can continue to live with.
Mhm.
But yeah, and if it takes for you, it was a year, and then you realize at the anniversary that things were becoming really hard again. So you chose to look at that. You chose to be with the feelings, the grief, the emotions that came up.
Mhm.
So as we wrap up, two questions.
Mhm.
Anything else that you want to share? And did you want to share like maybe one thing you wish you knew before experiencing pregnancy loss?
Yeah, I think thing I wish I knew is just what a like beautiful community it is. Of course, nobody wants to be a part of the pregnancy loss community, but there are such beautiful, supportive people out there that will show up for you. And that is huge. Like that is again, like I talked about, something that really helped me to navigate my grief and to get on the other side of it is the community. Because I feel like sometimes, your friends or your family or the people close to you that haven't experienced it, they just sometimes don't know. And
Mm.
you yourself don't really know what you want from them either. So it's hard. But I feel like when you find the lost community of people who do understand, it is healing, and it's a beautiful thing to have that connection and to have those people, and to also just realize like you will get on the other side of it. Like I feel like in the moment, especially after Carter, we had to give our baby a birth certificate, a death certificate, and hand him over to the funeral home all in one day. And then a few days later, go pick up his ashes and all these things that you feel like it's like the end of you. You're like, how this was supposed to be my pregnancy. I'm supposed to have a living baby on the other side. Like we're supposed to starting our family. So how has this happened? And you think like you can never get past it. But now knowing you can get to the other side. And, that's one big thing too for anyone experiencing loss and in the midst of your grief. Like eventually you can get there and you will overcome it, and it won't go away, but it will get easier and lighter for you.
That's so, again, such a really valuable thing to take away, because it can, like you said, it can feel like the end of you. It can feel like there's nothing on the other side. But if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep that, even if it's just those tiny baby steps, it will get lighter. That heaviness, the intensity, the everything that's sort of happening. And I could only imagine the trauma that you feel in having to give birth to your baby and, like you said, have the birth certificate, death certificate, and handing him over to the funeral home in one day. Like there's no rule book for that. There's no way that you can mentally process that at the time. You're just like, it'd just be this big, like you've mentioned a few times, like it was just like this overwhelming experience. Like, and how do I get through that? And how do I live beyond that? So definitely surrounding yourself with people who get you, who can show you as well that there is life on the other side of what you've experienced.
Definitely.
So, so valuable. Bobbi, I know you love to also help people and speak about the hematoma experience. So where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, my Instagram is at Bobbi, BOBBIIDEE. And that is my Instagram handle. And I am happy to, if you have any questions, because again, I know with hematomas, it's so difficult to navigate. There's so many things out there. There's so many different experiences within that. So I know that I have, shared my story and openly talked about it. So if anyone out there has any questions about that, and even navigating, loss after loss, too, if anyone out there needs a support, please, yes, look me up on Instagram. I'm happy to connect, be a friend, help navigate anything, any questions, definitely.
Yeah. And just to reach out, feel like you've got someone who actually understands what you're going through on the other end. Sometimes that can be all it takes, is just to get everything out and know that the person that is receiving it knows exactly where you are.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Bobbi, for being a part of the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very good. And I'm so glad that you have started this community and started your podcast. So thank you so much for having me and allowing me to openly share my story.
You are so welcome. And it is people like you, it's women like you that, want to come on and want to share, that we can continue opening the conversations, breaking the stigmas, and, hopefully in the future, these conversations won't be so difficult or few and far between.
Definitely.
Thank you to all that have listened in. If this episode was valuable to you, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode. Thank you for listening in with me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Take a screenshot of this episode, share it to social media, and tag me at Institute of Healing_PL. I love seeing what is resonating with you right now. If you want to chat further, I invite you to connect with me through Instagram. Head over and follow my Instagram account, send me a DM, and let's open the communication. If you want to know more about how you can be the support for others, head to the show notes and fill out the application form for the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner certification. I want to also note here that what I share within the episodes is not medical advice. If you need further support, please consult your doctor. Thank you again. Much love to you. Be gentle with yourself, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode.